Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. This month, BlackSheep has rewarded me. BlackSheep says, it's the year 20XX, and you, Mr. Pants, just became the Magic the Gathering World Champion. I'm surprised at myself, if we're being honest. As part of your prize, your semblance will be forever immortalized on a magic card. The question is, what does your personal magic card do, Mr. Pants? If you're confused, when you win the Magic the Gathering World Championship, you get, some stuff. They used to do this series where you would kind of design a card with them. You'd sort of pitch an idea for something a card would do. And they wouldn't maybe make the exact thing you suggested, but they would make a card inspired by the design you suggested, and the art would have your likeness in it. So, for example, I think the most iconic one in the modern day is Snapcaster Mage, but there are lots of popular ones over the years. I think Dark Confidant was one, is that right? And there's been quite a few. If you look up what they all are, you just look up Magic World Championship cards, a lot of them were maybe kind of obviously really powerful, very effective cards. You would expect that someone who won the Magic the Gathering World Championship would be able to design a card that would be very precisely really good, but not quite overpowered. And it's not that surprising that a lot of them are. Although, again, I'm sure that the team also tweaks it quite a bit in some cases. But again, I think Snapcaster Mage with the default, the original Innistrad art, if you go look that up, you'll notice that that mage looks specifically similar to the Pro Tour winner that year because it is him. And of course, some of the time these get turned into different visages in follow-ups. It doesn't always stay that person over time. In fact, a lot of them have gotten updated art because a lot of them have gotten reprinted because a lot of them are really good. So I'd like to preface this parlay by just quickly acknowledging this is hard. Like, doing a good one, it would be very challenging. I'm sure it's not the simplest process for them. They stopped doing it, I believe, and I'm not that surprised at why. Like, it seems like a complicated thing. So, what are our parameters? Well, there's a couple of things that immediately come to mind. Having it be a creature or planeswalker seems flavorful. If you don't play Magic the Gathering, a planeswalker is what you, the player, are from like a lore perspective. And when you play a planeswalker card, it's you kind of calling in an ally. So it would be quite flavorful for it to be a planeswalker. I think almost all of them are creatures, though. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, anyway, I think they're usually creatures, which is sort of a flavor or whatever. But anyway, creatures, people play creatures. I don't know. I think having it be a ubiquitous card is something. And personally, I also think that it's fun if it's a card that, can see a lot of play and that evokes something I like about the game, right? It should reflect me mechanically in some way. In my opinion, that's really fun. So again, hard as far as I'm concerned, but we will try. So this one, I kind of prepare for some amount of time for each parlay. And for this one, I spent a lot more of the time, writing examples because I think it's going to be quite challenging to come up with something on the spot that is coherent. So I spent more of the time, doing examples. So I'll go over them. I don't know if these are that great. I have kind of two concepts right now. Okay, so the first one, I've given them very simplified names. This one is called Contract Bloodseer. This costs a hybrid blue-black mana, a black mana, and a hybrid black-red mana. 3 mana. It's a Vampire Shaman, 1/2 with flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 1 life. If you do, you exile the top card of your library. You may cast non-land cards exiled this way by discarding a card in addition to their other costs, like their mana cost. And when you do, the creature gets a 1/1 counter. That's it. So I'll read it again, just because some people aren't as abstract thinkers, and I didn't take the time to make like one of those custom magic card things of this. I started doing that, and I realized it was going to take the entire time for this parlay just doing that. It's a 1/2 Vampire Shaman for 3 mana, pretty much black, but some blue and red if you want. A 1/2 Vampire Shaman with flying and lifelink for 3 basically black mana. At the beginning of combat, you may pay 1 life. If you do, exile the top card of your library. You may cast non-land cards exiled this way by discarding a card in addition to their other costs. When you do, this gets a 1/1 counter. Why? Why all of these things? The idea is that you've kind of hired a vampire shaman as a mercenary, and you can feed them blood or like your memories or magic and have them cast it, and they get stronger as they do so. They can return that investment to you because the card has lifelink. That might make it too strong, or maybe this card is too weak, and you can kind of pay in every time. You don't know if you're going to get a return, but it gives you more options while still rewarding you for improvising and working with what you get, which is kind of one of my favorite things about Magic, sort of the essence of the thing I like about Magic the Gathering. If you've ever seen people playing Magic and you thought, I don't really get why people like this, I feel like there are 3-ish things and then sort of some categories of player as well. The first thing is poker, wizard poker. It's basically, do they, don't they have the thing? Let's play a game of chicken, and you're trying to figure out, you know, if they're thinking on the level you are, if they have the removal spell or not, or whatever, and what is the good time to kind of push, much like in poker, just with different parameters, essentially, and more customization. That's a pretty major appeal of Magic. There's not very many formats where that isn't the case. Kind of managing resources like that and a bit of bluffing to some extent, or just it not being entirely clear how many resources the opponent has. The second thing, in my opinion, is the sort of limited improvisation, quite common in games where you do a run, you get random upgrades as you go, then you die and they reset. Your Hades, your Dead Cells, your, I don't know, any number of games. A little bit like in a lot of those games, you get certain controlled randomness throughout your play experience, and you're meant to kind of adapt to that to get the most power. Depending on playstyle, players will remove the need to adapt to that randomness, or really lean into adapting to that randomness, or not, depending on the person. But it is, you know, sort of a core element, I would argue. You have a lot, but definitely a meaningful step away from control, total control over what you get, if that makes sense. And so it's that point that this card is trying to evoke. You get to see a lot more cards. You kind of draw a card. You don't get an additional card. That would make this hilariously overpowered. But you kind of, you know, draw another card and create a sort of superposition of your hand while you're paying this vampire mercenary, and you pay 1 life at the beginning of combat. You get to exile that top card, and it's like you just drew a card. You have more cards that you have access to play. You just don't get, like, card advantage. You have to pay one of the cards in your hand to use the card that you exiled. So it doesn't just drown your opponent in card advantage. There's way too many things in Magic that make that way too easy. I'm trying to make a creature, kind of mid-range creature, that lets you see a lot more cards for kind of a modest investment, and then you're rewarded for, you know, rolling with the punches and trying to use those cards. You have a slight advantage in favor of using the cards that got exiled. Some of the advantages are the creature gets bigger, it gets a 1/1 counter when you cast them. You discard a card, which could be advantageous. You have to exchange a card in your hand for the exiled card. So you get a reward for improvising and using the cards that get exiled, usually quite a limited pool, you know, only one at a time. They might build up. And if you hit a land, it's bad. You can get unlucky. It's a little risky. You can't play lands. I said you can only cast non-land cards. But you also see more cards. So if you don't want those things you exiled, it's not like you have to play them. Although you are out the 1 life and you did mill yourself. It lets you kind of a little bit sort of fix your draws. This is one of those, and I think this is the mark of a good design, personally, but I don't know if this is that great a card. In my notes, I said too weak. If it dies right away, you get very little, and it's kind of risky, but it's very strong if left unchecked. Like, I feel like, I don't know if this is too weak or too strong. It's not balanced. It's either really bad or really good, which is good, kind of. Now, some of you... it's a 3 mana, mostly black. You can dip into some other colors. Bit of a heavier color requirement. But a 3 mana, 1/2 with flying and lifelink. This is kind of like Vampire Nighthawk, you might be thinking. Yeah, it kind of is. Vampire Nighthawk is a 3 mana, 2 black. 3 mana, vampire shaman, maybe even, with flying, lifelink, and death touch. That's a 2/3. So this is it, like it starts smaller, but you get this kind of, if you feed it, you can make it bigger again. There's also a Vampire Nighthawk variant that is also a little bit like this. It's like number of cards or costs of cards in your graveyard gives it more power, but otherwise it's quite like this. I'm not sure if I want yet another basically Vampire Nighthawk. Mine is kind of in different colors, but like not really. And the mana cost, I feel like this is a bit of a blue-black effect. This is a bit of a red-black effect. That's why I added the hybrid blue-black and hybrid red-black mana. But I don't know. You know, maybe this is just black. This is a pretty black effect. There are lots of cards that are only black that do something in the ballpark of this. Not a very greedy card, but it's a really mid-rangey card. That's why I like it. It's quite good against aggro, but you could also use it for advantage in a control situation where the life loss isn't much of a risk. And if you're taking things slow, like if this sticks, it can become like a little bit of an engine to help you figure the thing out. It's kind of a good glue card, making the deck's strategy more cohesive. And in exchange, I wanted it to have kind of an aggressive color requirement. It might be better if this is too strong. The number one way I would try to balance it is by making it cost blue, black, red instead of the hybrid mana. Just make it cost a blue mana, a black mana, and a red mana. I think that would make this significantly weaker, because the main thing this card is doing is letting you see more cards, but you need to have seen more cards to even cast the damn thing if it costs a bunch of different mana. So that's a good way to balance it. I'm not sure it is too strong, but if it is, that's what I would do. If it's too weak, I don't know, you could invert the stats a little bit, like make it less defensive. I think that makes it a better, it's already really good at walling aggro as long as it has more than one toughness, I think. Being that it's a flying lifelinker. If it gets like 1/1/1 counter, suddenly you've got, you know, whatever its power is, but 3 toughness, flying lifelink creature for 3 mana that lets you at least see more cards so you can find answers. That's probably usually pretty good against aggro decks. I'm not sure it makes that much of a difference if you move the stats around, as long as it has at least 2 toughness. That's just my thought at the moment. But making it have more power would make it more of a clock against control. I think largely in a control situation, this card is better if it had more power and less toughness. So maybe that's a good way to buff it. Like make it like a 3/2. That might be too strong. Yeah, that's kind of a lot. Another thing I'm interested in is maybe you can make it cost only 2 mana. Make it cost a black mana and hybrid red and blue mana, maybe. I also really like those cards. I really like hybrid mana, so that's another thing I wanted to include here. I like hybrid mana because it's like different interpretations of the card. It kind of captures the flavor of playing the card a different way. Like in a blue-black deck, the card has kind of a different feel than playing it in a black-red deck. I also, personally, this might be a bit controversial, I like that hybrid mana doesn't allow you flexibility playing it in commander-type formats where you need color identity. If it costs 1 black mana and 1 hybrid red-blue mana, it counts as being red, blue, and black, which is kind of a disadvantage for commander. You know, you can't play it in just a red-black deck, even though you could pay for it, which I like. That might be controversial, but I kind of like that. I feel like that makes it different than other formats, which is good. If anything, I feel like Magic formats are a little more similar, and a lot of the rules that make them different, like commander damage in commander, I personally think that's a really ugly piece of game design. I don't use commander damage in my own games. I think it doesn't make sense, but that's a topic for another time. So, elegant, natural, emergent differences between colors. Hey, you said I'm the world champion. I can be as indulgent as I want, right? Like, this is completely pointless, but I'm the world champion Magic the Gathering guy. I do what I want, apparently. So that's why. I don't know, I just like hybrid mana. And there's those cards, I think they're from Alara Reborn, or Conflux. They're from one of the Alara. Alara Reborn isn't a... Anyway. They're from like Complex or something in Shards of Alara. There's this cycle of creatures called they're something Blade. They're 2 mana creatures, I think, all of them, and they all cost like 1 of the shards core mana color and then a hybrid mana of the other two colors. So Shards of Alara, if you're not familiar, was an allied wedge set. So the colors are, green, red, black, blue, white. And allied or wedge 3-color pairings are the ones that are together. So black is next to red and blue. So there's a shard, a world in Alara that is black, red, blue. But it's core black, because black is in the middle. So the Grixis, that's what it's called, Blade card would have been a 2-mana creature that was 1 black mana and 1 hybrid red-blue mana. I don't know why I liked those so much, but I felt like they really captured the spirit of like a 3-color card that could be played in 2-color decks. Like I liked that. Some of them are also pretty good. Like you should go look at those cards. Some of them are pretty okay. I haven't looked at them in a while, but I don't know why I like those so much. I like how it looks, I guess, a little bit, but that's why. Okay, so enough about that one. Again, just one more time to give you an overview. I know it's a bit abstract. People who don't play Magic, we've probably lost, but if you're still enjoying this and finding it interesting, I hope you're enjoying, the game design discussion part. But to go over it again, my original thing was it's 3 mana, black, maybe some red and blue, I don't know, 3 mana. It's a Vampire Shaman. It's a 1/2 with flying and lifelink. At the beginning of combat, you may pay 1 life. If you do, exile the top card of your library. You may cast non-land cards exiled this way by discarding a card in addition to their other costs. And when you do, this gets a +1/+1 counter. I named it Contract Bloodseer. It's a blood magic caster that's a vampire that is sort of like a mercenary. The names are not meant to be fun or good. They're just meant to be descriptive. All right, enough about that crap. But again, the reason I like that is because it evokes something that is sort of the core appeal of Magic for me, which is that point about working with what you have, and yet you do have like a moderately high amount of control over the randomness. You're meant to improvise, but not to a ridiculous degree. Like you still have it. It's pretty reliable what you get. I feel like this card embraces that a little bit. It doesn't just drown your opponent in card advantage, but it does let you see more cards in a way that I think is flavorful. That's cool. I wonder if the World Champion people do the flavor part, or if that's more handled by the Wizards of the Coast team. But I went kind of heavy on making it a flavorful card because I like that. Like, I think it's fun. When you read the card and you feel like, oh yeah, like you paid this vampire mage blood, and that, makes you better at fighting in a somewhat magical way. Like vampires are physically strong, sure. And so it is, good at fighting. But it's a seer, a blood seer. It helps you see more cards and adapt to your spellcasting in some way. You gain some benefit. I also have always in fiction liked the idea of vampire blood as a kind of drug in some way. That's in a lot of media. I'm sure you can think of examples. If you can't, if you have a fun time on the internet. But I've always liked that too. Okay, so I have one more. But this one is the first one I thought of. I like that idea. I don't like how it's so similar to Vampire Nighthawk. Maybe this would be okay. Okay. Final answer for this one. Make it cost 2 mana. Like I said for my Grixis Blade guy. 1 black mana, 1 hybrid red-blue mana. We're just making another one of those. And it's a 0/1. This is the balancing cook with flying and not lifelink, maybe? I'm worried that if you give it lifelink at this stat line, this is ungodly strong in like aggro, because it lets you sort of fix your draws a little bit. I feel like that's crazy. And it not having lifelink makes it a little bit more punishing that way. It's a 0/1 with flying for 2 mana, basically Grixis mana. But otherwise it's the same. So as soon as you cast one of the cards it gives you, it gets +1/+1 counter. Another thing I like about this is that now that it doesn't do any damage right away, you're really encouraged to build your deck around a card you would be able to cast right away, like some combat tricky instant or removal or something, or a burn spell. You're really encouraged to put those in your deck, because then you can attack with this and, do the thing. it would get the +1/+1 counter right away and have it in time to do damage that combat. Like that's kind of cute. That appeals to me. Maybe that's a more fun version of the design. I also love creatures that have 0 power initially but are meant to fight. That's kind of cool. It also, I think, flavorfully, this is totally a better version. It's a flavor win because I'm just going on and on about this card, but that's what you asked for, so go figure. It's a flavor win because it's supposed to be like a contracted mercenary kind of blood shaman. The creature doesn't do any damage until you pay them. That's kind of fun. Okay, so that's much better. I'll read the whole thing one more time. My new version is 2 mana, Grixis with a hybrid mana. I don't know, 1 black, 1 hybrid red-blue mana. You could, I don't know, maybe it should be a different way, whatever. It's a Vampire Shaman. It's a 0/1 with flying. At the beginning of combat, you may pay 1 life. If you do, exile the top card of your library. You may cast non-land cards exiled this way by discarding a card in addition to other costs. When you do, this gets a +1/+1 counter. Cool. I like this version better. I feel like it's a bit strong, though. Or like with Madness cards, it occurred to me that this seems a bit like Fiery Temper is a little bit cracked with this card. Like that's crazy. Go look up Fiery Temper. It's basically a lightning bolt, but you have to do Madness if you want that rate. If you discard Fiery Temper, you can basically cast it as a lightning bolt. That's ridiculously strong with this card. Like you just play 4 lightning bolts and 4 Fiery Tempers and this card is cracked, but whatever. This isn't a real card, so too bad. That's nuts. Okay, the other one. This one, it's going to be a bit shorter. I've kind of introduced some of my philosophies about the game a little bit. And now we'll go from there. The third thing that I think is really appealing about Magic the Gathering is the ability to self-express by deck building. I kind of went into that whole thing about the different things I think appeal to people about Magic, but then stopped because I got distracted. The sort of third thing, poker, the sort of adapting to what you have kind of thing. And then there's the self-expression word cloud. Again, these are meant to be super high-level things, not very specific. If you're thinking of a specific thing and you're thinking there's way more than 3 appeals to Magic, yeah, sure, there is. I think they probably fit into those 3 large categories. I mean these in open-ended ways. But yeah, like, you know, you make a tribal deck, you make your elf theme deck, your soldier theme deck. Where could I be going with that? Anyway, your spell slinger theme deck, commander decks can be very expressive. What versions of cards do you want? What kind of sleeves or deck box do you want? What playmat do you want? Having like your whole thing, and you sit down with a player and they have this distinct loadout that is them. It's very personal. You're kind of, it's like cosmetics in a video game. It is cosmetics in a video game. I think that's a fun part of Magic the Gathering. And a lot of the time, I feel like different versions of cards or like aesthetics in Magic have gotten not just cheaper, but largely cheaper. Like you can pick a different version of a card a lot less expensively than you could, you know, only a short time ago. And many, many more common versions of cards have like an alternate frame. There are some sets where 3 different arts for a card come out and they're like all less than $1. So you could just kind of pick, what do you want it to look like? Which I think is kind of interesting. Some people don't like that. I get that. Anyway, this card is kind of meant to embrace that theme deck building thing, which I loved as a kid. Something about buying the little box. They had these little cardboard boxes that were so small. They were just the size of the deck of cards. Nowadays, they have these big honking boxes with a bunch of plastic. But they had these tiny little cardboard boxes that just had a shrink-wrapped deck. And that was it. And I would go down to some janky, it wasn't even a local game store, it was like some janky shop. And you'd buy one for like, you know, $10 or whatever. And it would be kind of bad, but this complete thing. And I always found that fascinating before I took matters into my own hands. And now I often find those a little bit boring or limiting, but it's fun to see what they make. And this is kind of meant to appeal to that, the inner child part of me. This one's development name is Coldfield Commander. This costs a black and a white mana. It's a 3/1 elf soldier. And it says, at the beginning of your end step, exile a creature you control. Then, if 3 or more cards have been exiled this way, draw a card. That's it. It's a 2-mana Orzhov, 3/1 creature. It's an elf soldier. At the beginning of your end step, exile a creature you control. Then, if 3 or more cards have been exiled this way, draw a card. That's it. Why? Well, there's a couple of things. I like, from a flavor perspective first, this is a battlefield commander who has to send soldiers in to die for nothing. They're exiled. They don't die. They don't trigger stuff when you sacrifice a creature or when a creature dies. They don't trigger any of that stuff. It doesn't trigger aristocrat stuff. Creatures that reward you when creatures die. The creatures are dying in vain unless you commit. And then if you complete the war effort, you start to gain ground. If you sacrifice enough, poor soldiers to the war effort, eventually you start to draw cards. Now, if you get this online and it starts drawing cards and you get an aggressively costed creature that becomes a draw engine, this is cracked. Like, this card is nuts if you get that online. But it's not very easy to get online, and it's also not a May trigger. So if you're getting machine gunned with removal, this card is really bad because it will probably exile your stuff for no reward and itself. It's not another creature you control, and it's not May exile a creature. You have to exile a creature. You lose a creature every single end of the turn. End of your turn. Which is, like, that's rough. But if you get it online, it's very rewarding. So this is meant to be kind of like on the surface, when would this even be good? This is terrible, you're thinking. But again, it's extremely powerful if you get it online. You get a no strings attached, like a draw. A creature dies and you draw every round. And keep in mind also, once you sacrifice 3 creature cards, you can then sacrifice like a creature token. You can have more expendable units after you sacrifice, the 3 heroes that couldn't die in vain. That's quite purposeful. I want you to be able to use a mix of tokens. I don't want this to just be garbage for token decks. Token decks have solid creature bodies too. You have to sacrifice a few of those, and then tokens benefit you a lot. If you're in like an aggro mirror or something where you're slugging it out, you're just beating each other up with creatures, this could be nuts, but it's probably a sideboard card. You put it in and have a slugfest with your opponent. If you can make enough bodies for this card, you're going to be beating them till the cows come home, but it's not very good against control. Personally, I think that the aggro control situation is sometimes quite boring. Like, the aggro deck either makes it or doesn't, so I don't want to add a tool for aggro decks. I want them to have a more interesting deck building decision in the sideboard. Do they sacrifice that much space to beat control, or do they want this enticing tool for when they're not getting machine gunned by removal? That's kind of hard. A thought I have? Maybe this should have hexproof. Maybe that would make it more fair. Maybe it should be untargetable, because I feel like this feels kind of bad where your opponent, waits until this has killed 2 creatures of yours and then shoots it with a lightning bolt or something. That feels like it makes this card like devastating. Like, the risk is way too high. You would never be willing to play the card. You kill 2 of your own creatures for a kind of do nothing 3/1 for 2 mana. That's just not good enough. So maybe giving it hexproof. Is that OP? Because once it starts drawing cards, maybe it loses hexproof once you start drawing cards. Is that too janky? I'm gonna say it gets hexproof. That's awkward, but I don't care. It is hexproof. Okay, so now it's a 3/1 for 2, 1 black, 1 white mana. It's an elf soldier with hexproof. At the beginning of your end step, exile a creature you control. Then if 3 or more cards have been exiled this way, draw a card. And this loses hexproof. If it gains hexproof again, it would lose it. This also makes it less stupid as part of like a sort of Voltron thing. Like, if you were to try to give it hexproof again, I'm not sure how relevant that is, but like it would lose hexproof. How does that work with? Oh, like an equipment, it wouldn't work. It would just get hexproof again. It only loses its own hex. That's fine. Whatever. The templating's a little bit awkward, but this isn't a real Magic card, so it's fine. I think that's it. Yeah. Again, the idea being that once the tide turns, the general does become vulnerable. but you they would need to kill it right away to kind of limit the advantage you were getting. It's still risky, you know, if they killed them right then, but that feels quite tactical. I like that. That they save their removal, and that's good, but it's not absolutely disastrous for you. Like, you do draw a card, you get a card back, and they do have to use removal to kill a 3/1 that probably wasn't particularly threatening. You had to destroy 3 creatures, you got 1 card back, so as long as, yeah, it's bad if they kill it right away, that's true. Wondering if you could do something more extreme, like draw 2 cards. That just seems nuts. It's like they if they don't kill it in what the immediate turn it becomes vulnerable, they just instantly lose. You drown them in card advantage. So I don't know about that. Another thing I was thinking of doing, to make this card a little bit more balanced, would be to make it so when you exile the creature, you gain life equal to its like toughness or something. The idea being that you're kind of furthering a war effort. It keeps you in the fight. And if you're making the card work, but your opponent's aggroing you out, that would make it, again, like better in that niche. It makes it more reasonable. This card will often force you to sacrifice a creature that would have defended you to activate the ability. So the idea that you don't just like forfeit the match against aggro, you know, and yet it's not that relevant against control, I don't feel. I guess because it has hexproof now, but they're just going to shoot your other creatures. And I like that they can do that, like they can kill your other stuff, and they can kill your solid cards as well if you play a bunch of tokens. Let's add the gain life equal to its toughness. You gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And another thing about this, finally, is that if you start doing tokens after you've sacked 3 creatures, it's not super overpowered. You don't run away with the game, because the tokens will often have low toughness. Like, you're not gaining gigantic amounts of life. You're just gaining little bits. Little bits of, it's inspiring the troops to keep fighting. That's meant to be the flavor. Maybe it should be you gain life equal to that creature's power. But is that just messed up in a racing situation? I'm not really sure. I don't know. Yeah. Cool. Finally, note that because it's not a May and it's not another creature you control, it's not like you can exile 3 creatures, and then once you've exiled 3, just stop exiling things and draw cards. This will kill itself if you try to do that, the way I've worded it. That would be obviously unfair. That's broken. So we're not doing that. Cool. All right. Finally, we'll summarize. My little nickname for it is Cold Field Commander, Cold-Hearted Field Commander. It's 1 black and 1 white mana for an elf soldier. It's a 3/2 for 2, a 3/1 for 2, with hexproof. At the beginning of your end step, exile a creature you control. You gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Then if 3 or more cards have been exiled this way, draw a card, and this loses hexproof. Pretty simple. I was thinking, do you give it lifelink? Because it's already really bad at attacking. It's good at trading. This card is kind of about trading. The whole point is the stat line doesn't really mean much. Like, it's 3/1, so it dies to a lot of stuff. It's just a normal guy. I like the flavor of, like, the field commander isn't stronger physically. You know, they're as vulnerable as everybody else, but they're kind of tactically protected. Like, unless you shell the entire squad, they're not going to die. That's the hexproof, but they die to, like, you know, shrapnel damage just as much as anything else. That's why they have 1 toughness. Again, I like that flavor. And again, finally, I really wanted a card like this that doesn't work for aristocrats decks. Like, I'm very frustrated by that. A lot of cards like this, there are a lot of cards like this. They initially look similar. They kind of give you benefits, usually life, but sometimes cards, for like creatures dying. It's sometimes colloquially called aristocrats as a strategy. A pretty popular, pretty effective strategy, usually in multiplayer games especially. And my problem is that a lot of the time, because that strategy has so much food, any card that would have this kind of flavor, where it's like if you use creatures expendably, you get rewards, it doesn't really encourage you to actually fight with the creatures. Like, it's better to just kind of sit back, basically. This card is not usually that great if you just sit back. You're just making it vulnerable while destroying solid bodies that you have. You want to be kind of brawling. A creature attacks and then you exile it. Like, that's sort of the ideal. I wanted to make a card that doesn't pay off that part of Orzhov Black-White, because I feel like there's way too many of those, and it's not interesting. That's my opinion. Finally, a minor detail. It's an elf. Yeah, I think it should be an elf. This reminds me a little bit of the elves of Lorwyn. So the elves of Lorwyn have a beauty complex. They call a lot of the other races of Lorwyn eye blights and will kill them for sport, just for being ugly. And they have a whole society about being beautiful and perfect, and you get exiled and they scar your face so that you don't look beautiful, and you're an eye blight now and you've been exiled. I think they call those people something else. Anyway, but like the assassin in this society just scars your face. They don't even have to kill you because you'll just be exiled for not looking pretty or something. Very evil, but I love the flavor of that personally. It's a really interesting way to have green-black flavor as well, a color combination I love. Life and death, and sort of the circle of life thing. I like that this elf society kind of embraces the idea of survival of the fittest a little bit in a very like a sentient creature society kind of way, not a very nature primalism kind of way, but it's still the same idea as like a social construct instead. I think that's really cool. So why white black? Well, in Lorwyn, there was a this fun twist where the plane kind of got inverted. We got Shadowmoor as a kind of sub-block. And all of the tribes were, most of them were two color, and they swapped out a color, generally. So elves went from green-black to being green-white because they were kind of the villains of the plane before. Now they're, the downtrodden, kind of destitute, but still holding out heroes, almost protectors of what little beauty is left, really inverted that way. And I thought that was really cool. So the idea of having an elf that kind of bridges those two flavors of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor elf by being white-black. They are kind of sacrificing comrades, but it's sort of meant to be for a good cause. That was my idea. That's me trying to fuse those flavors. I also feel this is quite similar to a lot of Soldier Tribal cards. Like, this does fit Soldier Tribal fairly well. I'm not sure you're playing black in Soldier Tribal, but I don't care. I am, so whatever. I'm not playing mono white Soldier Tribal, so go figure. Is this card relevant to constructed play? Like, as a sideboard card, again, like that's the main thing. This is kind of like a weird anti-aggro card. Maybe OP. This card is weird, so I'm not really sure how to balance that part. But I don't know. It seems okay. It seems like if you're getting burned out and you're an aggressive deck, but you're not going to burn your opponent out, this really helps you not die to the burn spells and then maybe get card advantage, up on your opponent after they shoot a lot of burn spells at you and they can't kill this guy once, they're set up. Cool. That's my answer. I hope you enjoyed it. I understand it's a little difficult to follow the abstraction, but I hope I did okay by repeating it a few times, and I iterated on them a few times too. I'll just quickly read both cards again, just if people want that, I don't know. But that's the end of the parlay. I'm just going to do that again just in case people kind of wanted to hold on to that, but it's frustrating to find it or something. The first card I nicknamed Contract Bloodseer. It's 1 black and 1 hybrid blue-red mana. It's a Vampire Shaman. It's a 0/1 with flying. And at the beginning of combat, you can pay a life. If you do, you exile the top card of your library. You can cast non-land cards exiled this way by discarding a card in addition to other costs. And when you do, this gets a +1/+1 counter. Other card I nicknamed Cold-Hearted, Field Commander. It's a black and a white mana. It's an elf soldier. It's a 3/1 with hexproof. At the beginning of your end step, exile a creature you control. You gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Then if there are 3 or more cards have been exiled this way, you draw a card, and this creature loses hexproof. That's it.